four, three, two, one.
Welcome to Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're telling the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. Casey Cares is the intersection of the nonprofit and profit communities, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. Casey Cares is proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. Shirley Chisholm left quite a legacy for the Black women of today. The first Black woman elected to Congress in 1968, representing New York's 12th district, Chisholm would go on to be the first Black woman from a major political party to run for president. The daughter of immigrants, Chisholm charted a path that inspired generations to raise their voices. Now in Kansas City, Chisholm's ideals live on in the nonprofit Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, advocating for women to have a seat at the table. And we welcome today its founder, Michelle Watley. Michelle, it's so great to have you with us.
Ruth, I'm glad you can bring me on today. Thank you for having me.
I have to tell you a little personal story. When I was in college, well, many years ago, and it was a big deal for women in politics, I took a course, and Shirley Chisholm was one of those women that was held high as an example of the future of America. Tell me a little bit about your connection with Shirley Chisholm and how this whole thing evolved with your kitchen cabinet.
Oh, that's a great question. I think my connection to Shirley Chisholm is the same connection that many women who aspire to leadership, especially in civic and public service, have, in that she is the matriarch, the idol, the champion for advocacy for women in leadership and for change. And so, like many women who have engaged in civic endeavors, she is an idol of mine, a mentor. Even with her not being here, through her experience, I've learned how to navigate. And so when I started a career in campaigning and politics, I found that I was having some of the same challenges that she talked about in her documentary. Not having a seat at the table, not having my voice being heard and respected, not being able to bring my full self to some of these experiences. And so, after having worked in government and campaigns for quite a bit and on some major campaigns and races in 2016, I worked for Senator Sanders in his presidential bid as a national political director. I worked for a candidate in Missouri in a senior capacity who was running for governor. I've worked on campaigns at the city level, ballot initiatives. And after all of that work, what I found, no matter the candidate, no matter the issue, Black women and their contributions and advocacy and civic life were not appreciated, were not uplifted, were not amplified. So that was what charged me to start Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet and name it for Shirley Chisholm, of course, because she's the trailblazer, but for the kitchen cabinet. And advocacy, the kitchen cabinet is that small group of advisors and strategists and funders that come together, and they often chart the path or the strategy for a candidate or a campaign, an issues campaign, long before it ever comes to the public eye. And I think that Black women should be at that decision-making table. And so that's kind of what prompted me to start Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet. We focus on advocacy, not politics. We believe that politics is just one vehicle by which you can create change. And Shirley Chisholm's life is an example of that. Shirley Chisholm was not only an immigrant out of Brooklyn, but she was a teacher. She came to Congress as a school teacher. She was changing lives every day in the classroom before changing lives as a member of Congress. Shirley Chisholm was a census taker. We all know how important the census is to be counted so that the resources that come down from the federal government are distributed to those who need it most. She spent her free time volunteering as a census taker. Shirley Chisholm was making change and advocating for issues long before she became a member of Congress and long before she ran for president. And that is what we want to amplify in the work of Black women, that you don't have to be a political savant, a strategist. You don't have to know who all is on Fox News or MSNBC in order to make change, that you can be a mother of 5 children, on public assistance and still have the power to go to your kid's school board meeting and advocate for changes in the curriculum if that's the change that you believe needs to occur, that you can be a woman in the corporate space and top leadership and still advocate for dollars being allocated to different leadership programs to ensure that there are more women in leadership in corporate spaces. You can step in and amplify your voice and power from wherever you are.
Okay, I've got to ask, you are a busy lady. How the heck did you find time? And was there one particular thing that said to you, Michelle, you got to do this? You got to create something and move the needle.
Oh, that's a good question. I am surely busy, but I think that's just a characteristic of being a woman in this day and age. Most of us have children and husbands that we're tending to and caring for, and full-time careers and extracurricular activities that our children have to, attend and be a part of. And then I'm of a generation that has parents that are starting to age and require a little more attention than they did when I was a kid. And so there's always responsibilities, but I think for me, after having worked in the campaign and advocacy space in 2016, which was a major election and kind of civic engagement year, I found myself exhausted and frustrated and wondering, why was I doing the work that I was doing? What was the main goal? What was the end game? And it couldn't be just to say that I worked for a presidential candidate or that I had helped a gubernatorial candidate. All of that is great. And it is a way to create change. But I wanted to take the experiences, the very rare experiences that I've had, having been in a senior leadership capacity in some very high profile races, the things that I've seen, the things that I've learned, the discussions I've been privy to, the tactics that I've been able to pick up, I didn't want them to just go by the wayside and be another job. And what I saw time and time again, and what we've seen throughout history, is that Black women are highly engaged. Black women are the most engaged voting bloc in elections. Black women voted higher numbers than everyone else in the United States. But Black women have always led movements and civil rights initiatives that have led to change, but they haven't always been the recipients of that change, of that work. It was Black women that started the Black Lives Matter movement. But we don't often hear the stories of Black women who experience police brutality. Black women were the leaders who started the Me Too movement, but we don't often hear about the stories of Black women having to deal with sexual harassment and the things that come with that. Black women were at the Women's Suffrage March in the early 1900s. But even though they participated, they were not exactly welcomed and wanted there. And so there's a history of Black women engaging in this space and giving so much, contributing time, talent, intellect, but not seeing the rewards. And so that's what prompted me to start Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet. For instance, we don't say that Black women need to be empowered. Black women have stepped into, leaned into power and do so willingly, without the resources, without the insight, without all of the tools that so many others have. So it's not a matter of empowerment. It's more of giving them the tools and tactics that they may not be privy to, so that their advocacy work yields greater results for them and the communities that they serve. So it was just a moment to take all that I had been privy to and blessed with, and make my impact exponential by giving those same tools to other women who are out there leading the way and leading the charge for change.
So, how do you deliver that? How do you pull these already maybe empowered by the fact that they want to be at a table and they want to learn how? How do you accomplish that?
That's a good question. We go about our work in three ways. One, we work to educate and train Black women in advocacy tactics and issues and all of the spaces that Black women may not have information about. We work to wield the collective power of Black women. So whether it's bringing Black women together as individuals, excuse me, or bringing together Black women-led groups to collaborate and work on initiatives and issues, that's another way we go about our work. There's an old African adage that says many hands make light work. And there are Black women leading initiatives and organizations that are making impact in the areas that are priorities for us. And so in those situations, we partner with those organizations, or we provide technical assistance, or we bring those organizations together. A great example of that was in 2018. We hosted a bi-state candidate forum in which we asked candidates to share their platforms and how they relate to Black women. We had candidates from both sides of the state line, from candidates running for Congress all the way down to school board at every level of government. And we partnered with almost 40 Black-led organizations to put that on. So it was a very much a moment of unification and collective advocacy when we brought that event together. We had over 200 Black women show up on a Saturday in the rain, in the morning. So it just
That's
shows that,
amazing.
yes, it just shows that there's an interest. And last but not least, we go about our work by positioning Black women for seats at decision-making tables. So whether that is working with city council members and the mayor to get Black women on boards and commissions, or position Black women as experts at our trainings and events, asking Black women to lead those trainings and to give that insight. We try to, at every point in turn, position Black women for seats at decision-making tables and as leaders. We focus on 4 different issues. When I started Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, we did informal surveying of Black women to figure out what were the top issues for Black women in the Kansas City region, bi-state region, and economic prosperity, health and vitality, education, and the eradication of violence in all the forms that Black women experience it. So whether it's violence at the hands of police or violence at the hands of partners who say they love them, domestic violence, we try to eradicate all the forms that Black women experience.
You have a very full plate of things that you're trying to tackle. I do want to share with our audience. Let's talk about the Crown Act and inform those that are watching and listening about what that is, and Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet's role and seeing that pass.
Yeah, so we were introduced to the Crown Act through another state that was working to get it passed. And basically, what the Crown Act is an anti-discrimination bill that essentially strengthens existing anti-discrimination bills that may be on the books at state legislatures or in local governments. What we're finding, and what Black women know all too well, is that hair can be an obstacle to having access to work or full access to education, because there are rules that are often drawn up in the workplace or in schools that say that hair has to be groomed, or that explicitly outlaws certain hairstyles like locks or braids or twist. Well, there's nothing wrong with grooming policies. There's not a job that you can get or a school that you can go to that will allow you to not be groomed and well-kept. That's not the issue. The issue is that when you have specific guidelines on grooming policies that only impact one group of people, then it becomes kind of a proxy for discrimination and racism. Locks, braids, and twists are hairstyles that typically Black people wear and are connected to Black culture. And it's those styles that are often called out. And it is those rules that then lead to Black women being disproportionately disciplined at work, or Black children not being allowed to attend school or graduate, or fully take advantage of the educational process. It feels innocuous at its surface, right? It feels like it's just a grooming policy, it's just hair, what's the big deal? But again, because these policies only really impact Black people, Black women and Black men and Black children, then it becomes problematic. And what you find is what the young man in 2017, Tyree Bannon, experienced when he went to get a job at Coolcrest at 16. He was told that he couldn't have the job, not because he was not qualified. They said he was highly qualified, but because he wore locks, right? Locks don't keep you from doing a job. They don't keep you from being prepared. Locks don't inhibit your work. And what you find in that situation, or in a situation like Tyree's, is that he's now blocked out of having summer employment as a 16-year-old, and an employer is now kept from having a highly qualified employee. I imagine it must be difficult to find 16-year-olds who are highly qualified for most jobs, because at 16, let's just face it, you're not uh, well prepared for the employment process. And so it's a loss on both sides when we have rules like that. So we worked with Black women legislators at the city level to get some changes done regarding how policies keep Black people in particular from having access to work opportunities and other opportunities in public spaces. And so we worked with City Council members Raina Park Shaw and City Council member Melissa Robinson to get the Crown Act passed in Kansas City. It passed unanimously in Kansas City. I think, and Kansas City was the second city, only the second city in the nation to pass a law like that. So it was historic.
Wow.
It was passed unanimously. The first city that passed it, it did not pass unanimously. It did not have the support of the full council. And so it was a great show of support by our elected leaders who, in their support show that they understand that there's an issue that needs to be resolved, an issue that could further, make it difficult for some of our Kansas City and community members to fully enjoy and fully be themselves in public spaces. And we got it done. We worked with a number of organizations to get testimony. We worked directly with Black women city council leaders to get it passed. And so it was a real show of what can happen when Black women and people in general raise their voices, amplify their power, and create change.
It's an amazing change. And I want to go and address what I think are two kind of earthquake issues in the last 20 months or so, and how that's impacted the work you're doing. First, let's talk about George Floyd and the whole reawakening of racial injustice. How has that impacted what you're doing, and is it allowing you more visibility? Is it moving the needle more for you since all of that happened?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's been interesting to see how the landscape of civic engagement advocacy has shifted since the George Floyd uprisings. I think what we saw that was very different because police brutality and losing loved ones at the hands of police is not a new concept for Black people or Black women. We've had that happen here in Kansas City, and it's happened in cities across the nation. And so the issue that George Floyd brought to bear is not one that's new to Black women. I think what was different this time around is that the attention that Black women and Black families have had to pay to this issue was then amplified by others giving the issue the same attention. When we look at the protests that happened here in Kansas City, it wasn't just Black people marching and Black people raising their voices. It was people from all over the city and of all backgrounds coming together to say enough is enough. And I think the way that it has changed or shaped our work is that it has made it ever more clear the importance of advocacy. It's hard to quantify the impact of advocacy. We're not, Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet is not a service provider. We don't, at the end of the day, say we fed 100 people or taught, 25 children to read. Our work isn't quantified in the same way. And so that makes it difficult to articulate and illustrate where our work is helpful. And in the funder space in particular, it had been difficult to make the case for why this work should be supported. Because while we may not be feeding the homeless or teaching children to read, by positioning women on boards and commissions, or training them in how to advocate, or preparing them for spaces of leadership, we are then in the ecosystem of creating change through systems. And that change may not show up for a few months or a few years, but that change is exponential. uh, if we can change systems, then we can also then begin to eradicate the number of people who are homeless, and shorten the number of kids who need to learn how to read. If we get Black moms on school boards and they understand what are the issues in the curriculum that are keeping our kids from learning how to read, then we won't need those service providers as much on the back end. And so, because of the George Floyd uprisings, it has been a little easier to make the case for why work in advocacy is not only important, but why it should be supported and what that support looks like. But the work is not far from over. It is, still ever present, and work still needs to be done. But we don't intend to stop until it is. We intend to continue to position Black women to be those voices and to amplify their power, because we all know that those closest to the problem are going to be more likely to have the solutions. And if we put those people in a position to drive the solutions and to create change, maybe we can finally see the change that we want to see.
The other topic is the P word, the pandemic.
Yes.
How did that impact your work and recruitment of other Black women to come to the table?
Yeah, that's presented another challenge. I think we were challenged like a number of other nonprofit organizations, in that we went from hosting events regularly in person to figuring out how to leverage the digital space and then still connect with people in the ways that they were accustomed to. There's a tenet of Black culture that values the in-person fellowship and coming together and breaking bread that just can't happen digitally in the same way. And so we lost some of that. At our events, we always held them at venues that were on bus lines, so that people wouldn't have access issues to getting to the event. We allow children at our events and have had childcare at our events, so that children can see their moms, doing the work of advocacy and learning and training. And that those things are hard to replicate in a digital space. So that's been challenging. I think the other thing that we've seen, we have about 2,000 Black women supporters on both sides of the state line. And these women range from, the affluent, highly educated, to, wealthy, to the other end of that spectrum, trying to develop wealth and access and gain access to education. And what we saw is that there was a subset of our membership, of our supporter base, that was now positioned to um, tend to issues created by the pandemic related to access to work or access to housing, that maybe didn't have those issues before. We have women who are college educated, who might have been living paycheck to paycheck, but were still middle class and able to keep things together. And then with the loss of employment, because we know that women were the disproportionately impacted group when it came to work losses in the workforce. And we know that women of color were even more disproportionately impacted. So we saw Black women who were college educated, who had been able to maintain, a standard of living, who are now having to go back into the workforce and look for jobs again, or who are having to find different alternatives for housing. We have in Kansas City a rising, cost of living when it comes to, apartments and housing. It is now more expensive to have an apartment in Kansas City than it has been ever before. I think Kansas City was ranked as the city with the highest increase in rental pricing and housing prices. And so during the pandemic, you have all of these different factors that are creating obstacles and had created obstacles for a subset of our membership that had been just fine before, that had employment, gainful employment, that had been able to maintain housing for them and their children, who are now having to find resources that they have not had to take advantage of before, and navigate a system of resource support that they haven't had to engage in before. And so uh, we have held everything from Zoom meetings to even sending out a weekly newsletter that has all of the resources we can find and a database for everything from, rental assistance to utility assistance to assistance with access to digital needs, whether it be the internet or broadband. We put those resources out weekly, and we have heard directly from our supporters who are of that group, who didn't know that these resources were out there. And, thank you for sending out this newsletter. I didn't know, I hadn't paid my rent in 3 months. I didn't know how I was going to pay it. And I found this resource and I applied, and now I don't have to worry about my rent for the next 4 months. It leaves me time to find another job. And so we have had to fill in the gap in ways that I hadn't envisioned when I started Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet, but it's important. We can't amplify our voices and power if we're looking for a place to live or if we're trying to find a job. And so taking care of those basic needs will help us better position Black women to then go back and fight for the systemic change, the policy change, the change in leadership that needs to occur so that these things don't continue to happen. The pandemic really highlighted areas of disproportionate impact in our healthcare systems, in our workforce systems, in our education systems, in technology. And so hopefully as Black women get themselves back on their feet and get to a place where they can get back to policy advocacy, these experiences will inform their work, and we can work to change the policies that have led to this disproportionate impact with the pandemic and all of those other sectors in the first place.
We should share with our audience if they want to find out more about the organization. It would be Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet.org. We just have a couple of minutes left. Where do you see the organization, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years? What's your dream of accomplishing, or where you'd like to be?
Yeah. So we can ask about Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet from all over the US. I have had women from so many states ask me, how do we start a Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet? I want one here in Philly. I want one here in LA. I want one here in Colorado. How do we do this? And so in the next 5 to 10 years, if we can find a way to scale and create a model that could be scaled in other cities and states, I think that would be the dream. Our vision is to see 5,000 Black women fully stepped into advocacy and changing the trajectory of the lives of Black women. And so any way we can, we've got 2,000, supporters just here in the Kansas City region. I think our vision of 5,000 will come sooner than later, and that we'll be able to expand that vision, hopefully nationwide. We want to be a vehicle by which policy is changed and initiated so that we can be the drivers of the agendas that matter to us and the issues that matter to us. And so having a headquarters here in Kansas City and working to scale our work beyond the city limits of Kansas City is definitely one of the visions for us in 5 to 10 years. Having a membership base that ranks in the thousands, and with women across the US implementing change in their cities and in their states and in their regions, is the vision for Shirley's Kitchen Cabinet.
Wow, you appear to be headed in the right direction, and I'm sure that Shirley Chisholm is smiling upon you for your efforts and how lucky we are to have you and the organization in Kansas City. So thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. I hope she's smiling down. It's quite the legacy to uphold and to follow. But Shirley Chisholm was courageous, not fearless. I imagine she had fear, but she was courageous and pushed through that fear. She fought for the leadership and lives and well-being of not only Black women, but of all women in this entire nation. And we have all seen time and time again that when we let Black women lead, everybody wins. And so hoping that we can go ahead and keep up that legacy of advocacy so that we can see change here in Kansas City for everyone and beyond.
Thank you for listening to Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're produced by Charitable Communications, and we're proudly sponsored by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation. If you'd like to be guest on Casey Cares, as Michelle is, or underwriting opportunities, please visit our website, caseycaresonline.org, and spread the love. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio and on Instagram at Casey Cares Online. And catch us on ESPN 1510 AM and 94.5 FM Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Thank you for listening to Casey Cares.